The Indo-European language family has a diverse range of children. Some languages include English, Russian, Armenian, Balochi, etc., all of them belonging to separate branches of the Indo-European family. One branch is Indo-Iranian. Within Indo-Iranian, there are three main branches: Nuristani, Iranian, and Indic, or Indo-Aryan. In the Iranian branch, many languages like Balochi, Kurdish, Pashto, and even Persian belong to. Within the Indic or Indo-Aryan family, some languages include Odia, Marathi, and Hindustani, which diverged into two other languages: Standard Hindi, used primarily in India, and Standard Urdu, which is primarily used in Pakistan. Today's video we're going to look at Persian and Standard Hindi, just for simplicity. First, vocabulary. Let's look at a few cognates between these two languages. The word for star, in Persian,
ستاره.
in Hindi.
Tara.
Next, the word for door, in Persian,
در.
and in Hindi.
Dwar.
The word for foot, in Persian,
پا.
in Hindi.
Pär.
The word for what, in Persian,
چه.
in Hindi.
Kya.
And the pronoun for you in the singular.
تو.
Tum. Tu.
In Hindi, these two are separate pronouns with two different meanings. We'll look at those a little later. One thing about Indo-Aryan languages is that a lot of them contain Persian loanwords, which are most abundant in Standard Urdu. Let's look at a few examples. The word for blood.
Khun.
This comes from the Persian word.
خون.
The word for hearts, in Hindi,
Dil.
from Persian.
دل.
The word for salt,
Namak.
نمک.
and the word for dull.
Kund.
کند.
Pronunciation-wise, we should look at a few things in Persian and Hindi. In terms of consonants, in Persian, many of them are pronounced the same as in English, but a few consonants are worth noting. First, these two letters, which are pronounced as a, which is similar to the Arabic letter a. Next, this letter, which is pronounced as kh, which many European languages have, including Dutch. And finally, there is this letter, which represents zh. This is used mainly in loanwords. There are three long vowels, a, e, u, which are all represented with abjad characters in writing. Then there are short vowels. These vowels are usually indicated with diacritics, but in most texts in modern writing, they're not used. Hindi, on the other hand, is a little more complicated. One class of consonants are aspirated consonants. These are consonants that have a h sound following, like k, p, bh, and others. Notice that there's a distinction between voiceless h and voiced h. Another class of consonants that might be a little challenging to pronounce are retroflex consonants. These are consonants where you touch your tongue to the roof of your mouth, like d, t, and others. There are 10 vowels, 5 short vowels, 5 long vowels, all of them which are oral, but there are also nasal vowels. Aside from the other 9 vowels have nasalized equivalents. Word order. Both languages are default SOV, subject, object, verb. This sentence means I eat with my brother. In Persian,
من با برادرم میخورم.
and in Hindi.
मैं मेरे भाई के साथ खाता हूँ.
First off, in Persian, we can drop the subject pronoun. Because the verb is conjugated to show person and number, you can drop the subject pronoun in Persian. But in Hindi, the subject pronoun can never be dropped. You might have also noticed that the verbs here are conjugated differently. We'll look at those later. Also notice that in Persian, there's a preposition next to the object of the sentence, whereas in Hindi, it comes after, making it a postposition. The way of showing possession is also different as well. Possessives are shown as suffixes on the noun in Persian, rather than using a standalone possessive adjective, which is also inflected for case. If there's an interrogative pronoun, in other words a question word, they come after the subject. Take this question meaning, what are you eating? In Persian,
تو چه میخوری؟
and in Hindi,
तुम क्या खाते हो?
word for word it's you, what, eat. Notice that in both languages, the interrogative pronoun for what, which we saw earlier, comes after the subject pronoun. I should also mention that in both languages, a present progressive form exists. In Persian,
تو چه داری میخوری؟
and in Hindi,
तुम क्या खा रहे हो?
both of these forms equivalent to doing something with ing in English. Verb inflection. The conjugation systems of both languages are different. Let's start with the verb meaning to give.
دادن
देना,
These words here are cognates and remind me of some Romance languages, and have a suffix on the end. In both languages, verbs have a suffix to indicate the infinitive, like to give, but how conjugations are built are different. Let's start with Persian. All verbs have two stems, a present stem and a past stem. Persian is well known for having its present and past stems sometimes being different from that of the infinitive, in most cases. First off, let's look at the past tense stem. All of them just use a simple suffix to indicate the person and number. But what about in the present stem? Well, it's the same, but in the third person singular, it's ad, instead of it just being the past stem. Me is added for the present tense, even though a simple present tense does exist in Persian. There are only two verbs that use the simple present stem. All other verbs have the suffix me attached. So what about in Hindi? Verbs are participles, with endings to show gender and number, plus the verb to be at the end. First off, the participle endings are simple. Ta for the masculine singular, ti for the feminine singular, and the plural form is just te. So that's pretty simple. But what about the verb meaning to be? In Hindi, it's
होना,
There are four conjugations of this verb. Similar to the present tense, to form the past tense, you just use the past tense form of the verb to be. Let's look at these inflections in context. This sentence means we give the money to people. In Persian,
ما پول را به مردم می دهیم.
and in Hindi.
हम लोगों को पैसे देते हैं.
As both languages are SOV, as I stated earlier, the default placement of the indirect object is different. In Persian, be is the dative or indirect object marker. It comes before the indirect object, while there's ra, which is the accusative marker. In other words, it shows the direct object. In Hindi, we have the word go. Go is the oblique marker. In other words, it shows both the indirect and direct object. When there's an indirect object, ko is used and the direct object isn't marked. And for the past tense, we gave the money to people. In Persian,
ما پول را به مردم دادیم.
and in Hindi.
हम लोगों को पैसे देते थे.
I should also take this moment to talk about cases. In Persian, nouns and adjectives don't have inflections to agree with cases. Prepositions and postpositions are used to show those, while in Hindi, like other languages in the Indo-European family, nouns and adjectives do inflect for case. Three cases, in fact. The nominative, which shows the subject, the oblique, which basically shows an object, but is used for any other case that isn't the nominative or the vocative, and the vocative case, which is used for calling someone or something. The inflections for nouns and adjectives are simple, but note that in Hindi, some adjectives are undeclinable. In other words, they don't take any of these suffixes. Pronouns. Persian and Hindi pronouns are fairly similar and fairly different. Also note that the word for person,
लोग,
or the word for all,
सब,
is suffixed to specify the plural in most cases. But these are just for subject pronouns. As I mentioned earlier, suffixes are used to show both the object pronouns and possessives in Persian. So, for example, iman shows both us, the object pronoun, and our, the possessive, in English. But in Hindi, there are separate pronouns used for the object pronouns and the possessives. The possessives being different based on the gender of the noun. Let's take a look at a few more sentences. This sentence means I have two brothers. In Persian,
دو برادر دارم.
and in Hindi.
मेरे दो भाई हैं.
On the surface, some similarities are there, but let's take a look. In Persian, there's a standalone verb meaning to have,
داشتن.
while in Hindi, there's the verb meaning to be,
होना,
which is used with the meaning of exist. So, literally, in Hindi, this sentence would translate as, my two brothers exist. In Persian, the verb
داشتن.
is one of two verbs to use the simple present tense. The other verb is,
بودن.
which means to be, which in turn is a distinct cognate to Hindi,
होना,
both of them coming from Proto-Indo-European bheo, meaning to grow. And one more sentence. This sentence means we will hunt for a week. First, in Persian,
ما برای یک هفته شکار خواهیم کرد.
Word for word, it's we for a week hunt want. In Hindi,
हम एक सप्ताह शिकार करेंगे.
we already saw earlier that the subject pronouns are different, the first person plural forms. Next we have the word for one. In Persian and Hindi, the noun itself is already definite, so to make it indefinite, you add the number one, which is the indefinite article, both of them being cognates.
یک
एक
Next, the word for week.
هفته
सप्ताह.
In Hindi, this is actually a loaner from Sanskrit. A lot of Indo-Aryan languages borrow a lot of vocabulary from Sanskrit, but within these two words, we see cognates. In Hindi,
7
and in Persian,
هفت
both of these words meaning 7. Here we see an example of how cognates will look different in other languages. Finally, we have the verb meaning to hunt, which are conjugated differently. In Persian, to conjugate for the future, you use the verb
خواستن
which means to want, followed by the past stem of the main verb, while in Hindi, a separate future conjugation is used on the verb. If we look at the verbs meaning to hunt, in Hindi, it's actually a borrowing from Persian. Well, if we look at the bare verbs,
کردن
करना.
both of which meaning to do, both come from Proto-Indo-European quer, meaning to do or make. A lot of compound verbs in Persian and Hindi often use the verb meaning to do as the auxiliary. But in future conjugations in Persian, we can see that the verb meaning to want comes in between the noun and the verb. On the surface, most vocabulary in both Persian and Hindi are not cognates and come from completely different roots. Grammatically, they're similar in many ways, and I think a speaker of one can learn the other relatively easily because of how similar the grammar is, the only difference being the vocabulary. But that being said, a lot of Indo-Aryan languages have a lot of Persian vocabulary, so speakers of those languages trying to learn Persian will often recognize a lot of words easily because they were borrowed into their languages. If you would like to learn either language, check out Persian Pod 101 for Persian and Hindi Pod 101 for Hindi. I'll put a link in the description for both of these. But let me ask you, first off, which languages do you think are the closest to each language? Maybe Sanskrit and Avestan? But hey, I haven't done the research. And what features do you think both Persian and Hindi share that would make learning the other easier for native speakers? Leave those down in the comments down below. Thank you everyone for watching this video of mine. I'll see you in my next project. And I can't wait for that. Until then, bye bye.